Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank somebody behind me.
That's right. Don't pay anything for light.
Pay no attention to that, the man behind the curtain.
Yes.
A long time ago, I had a friend who, a wonderful poet. Every time he would go up, we would have readings for a journal called Pivot. And every time we would go to the library and we did that, he would go to the audience and go and take his camera and take photos of the audience while he was up there. So that's what I did. He was a great poet. He's still around, too. His name's Michael Schaffner. So I'm going to read from my latest collection. I may end with one new one. This poem is called Advice from a Bat. Hunt only at night. Fly erratically. Defy even your own expectations. Feed on beetles, moths and mosquitoes, whatever is small and annoying. Cultivate the myths about you until every predator fears your legend. When hunting, be guided by a language only you can hear. The same is true when courting the one you love. Clean fangs and fur nightly. Crawl or climb to confuse the observant. Retreat to a cave no one believes in. Let the day and the world pass while you sleep, and sleep upside down, ready to wake and fall into flight. I was talking about 9/11 earlier, and I have a poem in here that's a result of that. I happen to work at the World Financial Center, not the World Trade Center, the World Financial Center, which is right next to it, and was attached to the North Tower. I was working there at Merrill Lynch at the time. So this was a long conversation that we had. So it made me think of reciting this poem.
Thank you.
This is called Birdwatcher. For 7 years, I've tried to approach the ground zero of my neighborhood, which happens to be the nation's. My daily walk to work for a long time through alleys of wreckage, detours that couldn't circle wider than the stench of burning flesh. And though the rubble was carried off, and quotidian alarms sounded the all clear, the horns triggering explosives to sink new foundations, the dwelling of our persistent belief in a future, and my own, the ribs of the new station arcing like a nest. I wake to a life still at the edge of ruins, a train sneaking round the pit to disgorge its passengers onto a platform, its length overlapped in the fog of histories, like the long approach to Athena's throne, where the Via Appia, but paved over, stairs at the end rising to the fences which lead me round the rim, walking into the low autumn sun, pressing metallic foil to the bell towers of St. Paul's and Trinity Church, slowly lifting its head above rooftops, stretching its fingers through streets, poking the Hudson, seeming to search with a bird watcher's quiet caution for a glimpse of the shadows it can cast but never catch.
Very nice.
That was more about like the aftermath of everything. We had moved after everything happened. We had an office in the building that was behind Trinity Church, and from the lunchroom, you could actually see over Trinity Church into Ground Zero. So I had a lot of time to watch the cleaning up, and you could smell things burning for a long time. Anyway.
Burnt for a long time.
It did, and things were burning. Not all inorganic. But let's go on to other things. A little more light. It's been a gray enough day. This is called Bioluminescence. Old philosophers would call this look melancholia. But I see in this photo of my wife thinking, weathers of competing beauty. Someone who can be in two places at once. There on the couch, leaning into the cushion folds, and somewhere else, focused on the unseen, beyond the clock's exhausting rap, working an idea like dough into the necessary bread. All moments of clarity narrow like this. The periphery dimmed as in a Rembrandt, his philosopher in meditation, sitting in a shaft of light, as if at the bottom of a well, because the profound leads into dark places, like the ocean floor, where the only illumination comes from the bodies of fish swimming through its miles of perpetual night. I did not ask how much time I should read for.
20 minutes. We have a late night
20
tonight, so we're gonna take your time.
Okay. I just wasn't sure. I didn't prepare exactly. Usually I prepare an exact amount. I know how much it takes me to read a certain number of poems. This had been the working title of the poem, the collection. So this had been the title of the poem before the title was changed. Always reworking and reworking manuscripts. It takes sometimes years. Turpentine. I might be late to meet a friend because I want to listen to bacon repeat its delicious static in the kitchen. Or stand at the window, looking into the yard, trying to decipher the hieroglyphs of shadow stenciled in the carpet of dead leaves. Or hear them tapping together in wind like a collection of beads, wondering what each color signifies, each sound. Or I might stay up late again, noting different shades of dark, the variant tones of a distant train here in Jersey City, blending with traffic, steam pipes and stray cats huddled under cars for warmth, and how this weave differs from what I remember in Pennsylvania, carried in the heavy chill through sugar maples like a thread wound and unwound in their limbs, and how these two versions of a distant train are distant from each other, divergent farther down their tracks that can be seen at any point along the way, or hinted at in their cardos, or understood by their schedules, because they travel circuits of private meaning, intimate as memories, like those of my uncles who were carpenters, who hammered and painted their lives out of wood and wallpaper, and filled their refrigerators with mason jars of turpentine, brush handles poking up like wooden beaks, the acrid smell filling the house with what I remember as the power of revision. I can't think about those mason jars without thinking of my mother telling me that one time when she was a little girl, she accidentally grabbed one of those thinking it was milk. She was okay, obviously, but not a fun experience. They were still there when I was around, too, so it was a weird thing. Why would you put it in the fridge? Didn't you do something in the basement for that? It's not a good idea.
He hadn't built the rack that you screw the lids to and then nail the whole rack in.
Yeah.
He was in the process of building it.
Maybe that's what it was, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take that as he's not around anymore, so don't have to worry about that. But,
Yeah.
got some- This next poem is a lot of the collection deals with things related to memory, history, how it's malleable in some ways. There are good and bad qualities to that, of course. This poem is more or less a celebration of a certain past when I lived in the village. And this is called The Generosity of the Past. For those who are interested, this is a sestina. The Generosity of the Past. In our apartment, there was always light, splitting through the windows like mercy, illuminating bookshelves and what we thought, our conversations or our glasses of wine, lifted to toast each day of generosity, the quantity surpassing what we knew. We read our books, discussed the world we knew, interpretations shifting with the light. We lived by an aesthetic of generosity, art and music, painting our world with mercy, although diluted by several bottles of wine, and so reduced to memory and thought. Sediment in the bottles was like a thought, a remnant of the past and all we knew. Nights listening to Liszt or tasting wine, arguing over how things changed with light, how sometimes saying nothing is like mercy, and disagreeing was a generosity. The simplest things are forms of generosity, like paying bills or making tea with thought for how you like it. Sugar, a little mercy. We knew that once, but then forgot we knew. So when we changed, we blamed the changing light and turned to vinegar like aging wine. But then we'd drink just anything. Old wine, bad scotch, tequila. Though still generosity, a generosity that took no delight, not in our books, not in a word or thought. We toasted to the past and what we knew, began the long goodbyes with little mercy. If time allowed us to forgive, that's mercy. And I recall with every glass of wine, because it's who I am and what I knew, and I am thankful for the generosity of that time, for its store of meaning and thought, which are to me here now a kind of light, for it's a light that makes a spectrum of mercy, colorful thoughts as deep and rich as wine, a generosity that's always new.
Right.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Pinehurst, great golf course.
Although then you can start thinking about
I'm gonna help you.
Emily Dickinson saying how time never did assuage. Actual, you know the poem. Things only get worse. No. That's not how she put it. Yeah, I like to see memory as a store of treasures.
I mean,
This is another poem that deals with problems of memory and recollection, called Setting Fires.
we have.
Setting Fires. I'm much older than this says now.
Now.
This poem's a little old now. And memory problems already kicked in at this point. Setting fires. We sat in the kitchen talking about tomatillos, that they were the distilled essence of all that's repulsive in tomatoes. And I stared into the kitchen table, trying to remember the philosophical word for what makes something what it is. One of those memory lapses, I'm told, increases with age, and dogs me now that I'm about to turn 40. Just then I imagined a bat flapping into the kitchen and attacking me. It must have been what pursued me into another day that was just as desperate, driving through the Catskill Mountains, late again, closed roads, wrong turns, and houses where no one answered the doors, and autumn leaves burned in the backyards. It had something to do with choices made and not being able to turn back, and the smoke of those burning leaves, torn by wind into nothing, except a sweet, dissipating aroma accenting the hills. that excursion through the Catskills was me trying to get to another poetry reading. In upstate New York, a place called Bright Hill Press.
I've been there.
They have a really wonderful series, wonderful press. I've known Bertha for a long time, but every time I go there, I get lost on my way. And GPS is no help. It's just not. This is called Seed. This is moving into aspects of history in relationship to memory. Seed. I prefer reading history in a flowering of dirt and cooked mud, the glittering text of macadam after rain, the squirrel's risky acrobatics in the mulberry, leaps from limb to telephone cables, the occasional fall and hard thud. The beauty of this daring makes a stage of my backyard, makes the page of a story printed in the very enactment, an image I carry with me, like a book of hours, or the stained glass panels of Sainte-Chapelle, telling the whole story from creation to the end of the world, in images and colors radiant with struggle. I'm glad you like it. This poem is, well, basically it tells you the source of where it comes from. It's called Paperclip. I learned that in an interview to enter Oxford, they might ask how you would describe infinity. And I thought about once being asked how I would describe a paperclip to an alien. That is, to someone who's never seen one. It was a writing exercise that made me think of how I would describe the autumn mountains where I grew up. And I decided that they are the color of whiskey and intoxication and exuberance, which might be a way of describing a paperclip, that is, a wire that's intoxicated, wandering in circles, swiveling on its heels as it makes its way out to meet friends that it embraces, holds together in a maudlin circle of endearment, all of which is also how I think of the infinite. This is the poem that concludes the infinite doctrine of water. It's funny, I now think of two people who are no longer with us when I read this poem now. Because one, it was published by a really remarkable young poet who's doing amazing things. He edited several journals. He taught at the University of Illinois. He a science fiction novel came out that he wrote with a friend of his, and I think it was about to be optioned to do. We were going to do a series based on it. It's called "The Doors You Mark Are Your Own." Okla Elliott was the poet. He had a poetry collection that I reviewed called the Cartographer's Ink. Came out with New York Quarterly Books. But he died like at 39. And then my neighbor's in here too. But he passed on just 2 years ago. The voice of water. It sounds like grape leaves shaking. It cushions like thick grass underfoot. Its currents spread beyond the range of mountains, which is why sometimes people mistake it for the distant trickle of the sun setting. The error depends on which way they're walking, and if the wind is blowing from the north or south. It licks your fingers when you wave, and only by its tongue can you tell if the person you're greeting is a stranger or some distant uncle. Comforted by one of its many dialects, your neighbor grins from his porch, cigarette in hand. When it whispers with the same heaping hush of salt pouring from an uncapped shaker. Because of its excesses, it remembers. Even if after you've closed the book, it keeps reciting the lines. I will close with a new poem that, newish, always working on stuff. This is newish, not in a book, not in so I'll close with this one. This is called Diagnosis. Not bronchitis, not asthma, but an ailment of memory that leaves you breathless, censors your words before they leave your mouth. Whole phrases sucked down and trapped in the bronchioles, there fused with mucus into glass, the transparency of others living in your place. The doctor taps your chest until there's a ringing in the ears, a trembling in the pelvis. It's a note sounding through history from those not found in it. Sweep your fingertip around your lips. If you're still as feather reed grass on the rim of a frozen lake, you'll hear the hum of an empty wine glass decanting repressed memories. The doctor never heard anything like it, knows no medicine to crack the ice or loosen those words and cough them up. He's seen nothing like it in any of his books or medical journals. None of his peers can recall a case to compare. And soon, he seems to not even notice you're in his office.
Wow.
Thank you.